This is a production of Cornell University.
I can.
All right, good. Thanks, Andy. Good to see you. Andy McNitt's with us today, and I'm not going to waste a lot of time because there's lots of lively conversation. I thought I'd put something funny up. When you don't have your professional sports turf managers on the job, this is the kind of stuff that can happen. So hopefully we'll take another half hour here and distract you for a little bit, get you to think maybe about bigger issues that are going on. Try to find a little inspiration in people that have led us through difficult times in the past and at times seems anxious. I think, remember, we've come through as a species a lot worse than this. But I will tell you, I was chatting with some people on our shortcut conference call this morning, and we talked about how this new pathogen is traveling around on geraniums or begonias, I thought it was this morning, Carl. And right away, Rich Buckley says, oh, yeah, we've got the network set up and we're going to isolate and quarantine that population of begonias. And I'm thinking, boy, if we could just do that with the human population, we'd be all set. So again, drawing your attention to the resources that are out there, the STMA has continued to provide those resources very effectively across the board for the things that you need to know locally. I'll put this on so you can see it. This is going to be what it's going to look like for a while as we start to wander out there. For those of you that are wandering out of New York, particularly if you're interacting with somebody, these are executive orders now. It behooves you to pay attention to these things. And certainly if you're in school districts or municipalities or facilities, you're going to actively be hearing about the things that are going to be required from you. We're going to talk about synthetic turf in a minute, but this is multi-use during COVID. Let's go to our superintendent's facilities, buildings and grounds survey for this week. They did a survey asking, and they got about 45 answers. How many days a week does each maintenance staff member work now? So you can see there's a significant amount of people who don't work a full week. That are part of maintenance staffs on school districts across New York. So obviously this is a point of concern if we've got fields and things to take care of. And of course, for the first 4 weeks, we've been actively talking about that. Now, Adam Toms and Nick Christians did a wonderful job. Oh, let me go. I'm sorry. I got that slide in the wrong place there, Andy. Sorry about that. Here we go. I'm a little confused. Now I got it. All right. Anyway, we've been talking about the weather. Before we get to synthetic turf and tell you why we're talking about synthetic turf today, let's just talk about how the growing season has progressed. Well, first off, back in March, it was looking pretty good as far as growing grass goes. You had temperatures in the 60s, in the 2-inch soil temperature in the 60s, and you could see well into the upper 50s down there in State College where Andy is. Started out looking pretty good. And then the following week, you could see it really starting to emerge in the metropolitan New York area, the soil temperature at 2 inches. And we've literally been in a stall and backtracking. So this was last week, and this is the soil temperature as of just a couple of days ago. And it really hasn't moved very much. And now we're barely creeping into the 60s. Into the low 50s, where many of us are still in the 30s. So from a grass perspective, obviously some of you are growing grass actively in sports turf because if you're expecting spring sports, you're setting your fields up in the fall so that you're good to go when they want to play lacrosse at the end of February in the Hudson Valley or in upstate New York on natural grass fields, right? So you've been gearing up. That doesn't mean the grass isn't growing, right? But here's what's happened to the growing season. Early on, you could see it was creeping along. And then the second week we were together, you could see double-digit accumulations. We were warming up in the early part of April. And to be honest, we've been in a stall since then, and it looks like the foreseeable future isn't going to change. In fact, we heard from our Northeast Climate Center person today indicating that we're not going anywhere, maybe even for the next 2 weeks. It looks like cool temperatures and very little growing degree days are accumulating. In fact, hardly anywhere north of the Pennsylvania-New York border accumulated a single degree day at all last week. So we're staring at this, plus a significant amount of rainfall is on the way that we heard. In some places as much as 2 and 3 inches of rainfall over the next week. Well, again, what does this mean for grown grass? Well, this is the same slide I told the golf guys yesterday. This is the same slide I've been using for the last several weeks because we really have barely budged above the 50-degree average air temperature. And again, this is growth potential, the potential that your grass has to grow based on the current temperature. Now, there can be other factors that can drive this. For example, if you've got a nice dark green turf, it's going to warm up more rapidly. You're likely to get warmer soil temperatures, right? So soil temperatures and air temperatures are going to combine to give you some growth. But in general, we're nowhere near what we would normally be. In fact, the reports this morning were that we're a week to two behind now in normal springtime temperature accumulations. Okay, so let's transition right away. There's not a lot to say. I mean, we've talked about a lot of things over the last several weeks. And when Carl and I first were talking about doing webinars, we were going to do this every other week. And then it seemed like the issues were really, emerging and we should talk about it. And as we've not been growing grass, and really a lot of the things you should be doing is planning for what you're going to be working on moving forward. Many of you don't have people using your fields, but there raises questions about synthetic turf use. So let me go back to my presentation here again. I wanted to just, I didn't get my things all together here. I got confused there. I didn't save the presentation that I created. So this is what's happening to some synthetic turf fields. They're being converted for multiple use. Now, a lot of us buy these synthetic turf fields, or we're told to buy these synthetic turf fields as it's come about over the last 2 decades because it's no maintenance or it's limited maintenance. And there's been a variety of debates back and forth between synthetic and natural grass. And I'm not going to really engage in that debate at this stage because if you've got synthetic turf, there's no sense in debating it. But you could argue that during times like this, when the weather isn't very good and the rains are coming, synthetic turf fields provide you an opportunity to use outside activities without destroying the field. Now, Adam Toms and Nick Christians on the STMA website put together an answer, a lengthy answer to this particular question, and they address in one paragraph what you might do with synthetic turf. So first off, it says, consider sweeping the fibers, stand them back up, and collect any debris that may have ended up on the fields. Laying down fiber is a bit of a problem, and we'll talk with Andy about how that gets done, what the value of raising these things up. Obviously, consider having it tested for safety, and they also recommend maybe it's just a good idea to sweep it off so that organic matter doesn't impede drainage. Now, a hot topic around synthetic fields are microbes, and Andy was knee-deep in this many years ago and published a paper with Tom back in 2011, but this continues to come up, different ways of sampling, looking around for different organisms. That particular issue isn't going away. So as we introduce you here, Andy, and we get a chance to transition to our conversation today, a lot of people have synthetic fields. You have a wonderful resource here with Tom at the Center for Sports Surface Research, where you've been doing maintenance and footwear and safety work for a number of years. You've published papers with, kinesiologists, all kinds of work in the medical profession around sports industry. But the topic for today really, Andy, is now that we have these synthetic turfs, let's say you can't get out and maintain, or you're not going to be playing some sports, people are going to want to get on their synthetic turf. And actually, maybe if you have some work to do, you might consider maintaining it. So let's start with me shutting my screen off and you being able to look at me. And we'll start out right away with, okay, you got a synthetic field. Let's assume it's been in the last couple of years and you've been keeping it up. Let's start with the gold standard. What kinds of things are synthetic turf managers thinking about beyond maybe what Adam and Nick mentioned in that letter?
Well, I'm not sure that there's much beyond that. I think they did a great job. This time of year when the field's not being used, it does give you an opportunity to do, sort of the big three. And that would be making sure your infill depths are up to where they should be. And this is a good time to apply infill. So the number one maintenance thing for safety and playability over time is to make sure those infills are up. The infill is what gives you the cushioning We have some data that shows that higher infills will be beneficial on injuries to traction. I mean, it's not going to make a gigantic difference, but it does make a small difference. So on our website, we've got a nice Excel spreadsheet, same one that we use in the NFL. You can go in there and download it for free. You can enter all the data of infill, how to measure it across the field, what your target range is, making sure that it's even. So that's good. Obviously, you know, if they're not using it and the fibers are standing up straight already, there's not really that much necessity to broom it. But if the fibers had laid down last fall, as this weather gets a little bit warmer or on a nice sunny day, those fibers will heat up. It's a good time to stand them up and leave them standing up. So that's a good practice. And sure, removing the organic debris is fine. You can have a tester come in and test the field while it's not being used, which is fine as well. I mean, I really prefer that rather than pay a tester $500-600 each time they come in, that you pony up $4,000 and buy yourself a Clegg, and then you can do it monthly, weekly, however often you think you need to do it.
So the big three, Andy, the big three, infill volume, and your research was really critical, right, in identifying that role in some safety issues, right? That infill volume, and there's tools for determining that depth too, right?
There are, and we have informational videos on the site. So you can buy for $15 off of Amazon insulation depth gauge. You can also buy fancier ones from turftech.com and Mascaro down there. Mm-hmm. And you can even use like a tire tread gauge, and you can walk around and measure those depths pretty well.
Okay, so listen, one of the things I've always wondered about, and I've heard debates about it, and you see pictures about it, is the grooming of these fields, right? Obviously, it's a double-edged sword. And on one hand, the more you sort of fuss with them, you're degrading them. Every time you abrade them in some way, it seems to me, as I've read, you're degrading them. So you don't want to overdo it either, right, in trying to stand up these fibers.
Oh, correct. And in cold weather, it's difficult, especially with the monofilaments. You know, the monofilaments are sold as, hey, they stand up straighter, they're better for ball roll. That's true. They're much harder to bend over. But if you do bend them over, they're a lot harder to stand back up. So you bend those over through multiple use. You know, I really think that fields that are being used every day at high schools should probably stay with slit film. The monofilaments are for high-end soccer fields, and they do a great job there, but you can't let them get bent over. You let those things get bent over in a high school and cold weather comes, you're going to have a heck of a time ever standing them back up again. So yeah, they should be broomed. Use a correct broom. The stiffness of the bristles is important. The brooming certainly does add to degradation of the fibers, so you don't want to overdo it. But I think that a field that's being used at a high school, 5 days a week, should be broomed at least weekly.
Okay, so what about those tines? We hear a lot about this rubber compacting over time too, right?
That's incorrect.
That's incorrect. All right, let's hear about what I got to do. Do they compact, and do I have any issues about that?
They do not compact significantly. I mean, if we think about why we build natural grass fields out of sand, is that, if we size that sand all the same, it can't compact. And the same sort of thing happens with the crumb rubber and the sand. As long as it's sized correctly, and you're dealing with a good vendor, it's not going to compact, and that's why it's in there. So the reason they use the tines is it's better at standing fibers up, especially ones that have gotten buried. So if you think about, running a broom across it, if somebody's cleat stepped and buried that fiber, it's very hard to get it out. So those tines can kind of go along and pick those fibers back up and open them up. So relieving compaction is really not. The things that cause the field to get hard, number one, walk off crumb rubber. As it leaves, we know it gets in your washing machine, and it's in the hallway, and it's in the locker room. That cushioning is disappearing slowly over time. The other thing is paint. So if you are not scrubbing your paint well, and if you just keep going and keep painting and painting and painting, that thing will become rock hard. So those are the two main reasons that fields get hard over time.
Is there a way to top dress and fill? Okay, as you done the volume research, have you learned that the volume exposes less and less fiber, that standing it up is easier if the volume of rubber is adequate?
Yes. So it holds it up. I don't think standing it up, I'm not sure it's any easier to stand up with the higher volume, but it keeps it standing up. It also shades it. Remember, a big reason that the synthetic turf breaks down over time is UV degradation. So if you have more and more of that fiber hidden, there's less reveal. That's what they call the amount of fiber that's standing up. And there's some good indication that the field will last longer by having the crumb rubber filled up. We also see beneficial traction characteristics, and the field is softer. So, all of those things combined, there's really no reason to not have that infill at a proper height. And that proper height is determined by the manufacturer. They'll give you that target depth.
And so to me, what you're saying is one of the biggest problems with these fields is the rubber gets displaced and moved around. Not that it gets compacted, but that when you cut and you see a spread, like a spray of rubber, that means it's just gotten moved from there. How do you then redistribute is it possible to redistribute it, or do you have to always top dress it?
No, you can redistribute it, but it's funny when you see all that crumb rubber fly. It's surprising how you're not getting depth. I always thought when these systems first came out that we'd see way more pock marks and divoting and like movement of the fiber. It's surprising. I mean, in goal areas of lacrosse, you'll see a displacement that's pushed out, but surprisingly, it doesn't move that much. And so you see that splash, you think that's a lot of crumb rubber. It's not a millimeter. I mean, it's kind of amazing how. So there is some redistribution needed on heavy used areas like the goal mouth of lacrosse, the kickoff X from football. For some reason, we always have to be messing with, but it's really just the walk-off crumb rubber. It sticks to the shoes, it sticks to the uniform, and it slowly leaves kind of even across the field over time.
Okay, so now that we're talking about, we've sort of managed the grooming, I think, pretty
Looks
well.
like he froze.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Freeze for everybody, or did he just freeze for me?
No, can you hear me?
I can.
I can hear you, Frank.
All right, so let me go with this so you don't lose me, Andy. Let me ask you about microbes, because obviously now we live in a new world with concern about microbes. You were way out ahead of this early on. The discussion has evolved. Where are we at now with understanding how to manage microbes in these fields?
So it depends which microbes you're talking about, right? And we'll start with the ones we know something about and kind of end with the ones that we're still pretty unsure of. So bacteria like MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, MRSA, is killed by sunlight. And it's not only the UV rays, they're really good at killing MRSA, but the visible blue light will also kill MRSA. So it's not necessarily the heat. Originally, I thought it was because the synthetic fields heat up, but it's really the light. So you have a field that's outdoors. There is essentially no reason to treat that for bacteria. The sunlight is a great disinfectant. We have a hard time keeping the MRSA alive for 15 minutes outdoors, much let alone overnight. So when the sun's out, you've got a great disinfectant. Fungi are not killed so much by light. And so we do find when we do a bioassay of what's growing in synthetic turf, one, there's not a lot growing, and certainly not compared to soils, because it's not a hospitable environment for microbes to be growing in. But we tend to find a predominance of fungi, mostly because they're not so affected by sunlight, right? And then we start to look at viruses, and there's very little work done on viruses, right? So there's been a few studies that came out. They show COVID-19 is not very susceptible to temperature changes, but there is some very early and maybe not, necessarily confirmed with numerous studies, some indication that it is sensitive to sunlight to some degree. And they're also saying, you know, it can live on different kinds of surfaces for different amounts of time. It seems as though the more porous the surface is, the more it will kind of absorb the virus. And while we don't know how long the virus necessarily lives, whether that's different in a porous material as opposed to a smooth surface, we know that it's a lot harder to get the virus back out of the porous surface. It tends to hold on to it and it keeps it there, right?
Yeah.
So is crumb rubber and sand porous? We do know that crumb rubber has some heavy metals in it, and there's some indication that with MRSA, there, you know, certain types of crumb rubber, because you have some cadmium in there, small amounts, you have some lead in there, will actually, there's a differential death rate of MRSA in a closed environment without sunlight. So a new paper came out recently about that. But you're talking about differences between, you know, 1 hour and 5 hours or 6 hours, you know, overnight and in sunlight.
Yeah.
It's
So
pretty much
what, listen, what got me thinking about this, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah. What got me thinking about this is, you know, the way I think the public connects things without all the information. Number one, everybody's concerned about COVID persistence on surfaces.
Mm-hmm.
Synthetic turfs had a history of where, you know, whether it did or it didn't, it had a history of being associated with some microbial problems. If a sports turf manager, you know, as we gear back up and people might play ultimate frisbee but stay back from each other, maybe we start adapting some sports and synthetic turf becomes something that we use, and somebody says, listen, I want you to disinfect this field, okay? Don't talk to me about it. Just disinfect the damn field. I don't want to be worried about liability. I don't care what the research says.
Sure.
Spray it. Right. We used to do this. What do we have recommendations, or did we, once when we figured out that it was useless, we stopped doing it?
Well, the NFL actually banned it on synthetic turf fields and game day fields because, I mean, they did a study with Mount Sinai doctors, and this was mostly focused on MRSA, right? Mm-hmm. They said there is zero benefit that they can determine from all the literature for MRSA, and who knows why spray it? There could be a disbenefit, which I didn't know was a word until those doctors told me that disbenefit is actually a word. So it's not allowed to be sprayed there. But now we're revisiting that with COVID, of course. So here's the thing: I tweeted out the CDC list of things that kill COVID. There's a long list, and I think STMA has put it on their website now too, the CDC link. So you can look at that. But one of the things that's on there, as we know, is soap and detergent. So the easiest and best way to me to disinfect the field is about 8 handles of Tide. Right, 8 gallons of Tide in your spray tank. Spray it out across the field. Run the broom over it once while it's still damp. And I know if it's too damp, you know, you're going to pick up crumb rubber. So you have to play the game as to when the water content's right. And we know from MRSA, we studied it, that 8 gallons over the field is enough to kill MRSA without sunlight. So what it does to virus, what the concentrations need to be, I don't know, but detergents and soaps are on the list for the CDC. So with the knowledge we have right now, and it could change, right? But with the knowledge we have right now, about 8 handles of Tide in the spray tank, spray it across the field, drag it once, you're good, especially if you're outdoors.
Was there any particular fragrance you were fond of, Andy?
Well, I'm sort of a Snuggles guy, but and we did find that fabric softeners work just as well, right? I mean, they are a cationic surfactant. Tide is an anionic surfactant, but both of those worked. It's just that the fabric softener is a little more expensive, but it smells nicer. Okay. And we use Tide. The only reason we use Tide was, you know, it's the #1 selling brand. It's not that it's brand dependent. But look at the list that's out there. I don't think you need anything real complicated to do this. And then at least you've made your best effort. You can tell your administration, hey, we did it. Does it prevent somebody? Does it prevent an athlete during an event of falling, depositing it, and somebody else falling on that same spot and getting it? Not necessarily, right? But I'll tell you, there is no documented case that I'm aware of anybody ever getting MRSA from a field. What happens is they fall, they abrade themselves because synthetic turf's more abrasive. Then they rub up against another athlete that has the MRSA, and they get it from the other athlete, not from the field, but they got the abrasion from the field. So it would be my hopes that, you know, before you start letting somebody play ultimate frisbee, that those people are tested and are COVID free, right? I'm not sure I want to play ultimate frisbee with somebody who's positive, right? But let's say you have to disinfect the field. 8 handles of a good detergent sprayed out across the field, light brooming, and I think you're done. And if it's outdoors, you know, you give it 24, 48 hours, and my guess is, and that's a guess at this point, that the COVID is gone. But we don't know. There's more information is going to be needed on that.
Yeah, this is a big area. And again, because of that link, I think we're going to get questions. That's why I'm so glad and appreciate you coming on. Carl, we got questions?
Yeah, just one question from Mike. We were talking earlier about how the compaction issue really isn't there with the rubber infill, but he's asking about the organic infill materials. Is that a situation where compaction is an issue?
So I have less experience with it.
What are organic infills? Let's start with that.
So organic infills are coconut husks. We have seen cork being used, walnut shells, which I guess they're still out there. The most recent ones that I see are things that are pine byproducts. I mean, we're considering that for a couple of fields. The only field in the NFL using that is Miami's indoor, and they have an organic infill. So with the organic infill, you don't get much cushioning from that. So at this point in time, our recommendation is if you're going to use an organic infill, you want to have a pad under it. The crumb rubber, we find that if you keep those crumb rubber levels up, you really don't need a pad. And half the fields in the NFL, game day fields, are over concrete or asphalt without a pad. They have no problem G-maxing under 100.
Are the organics heating up more, Andy?
No, they're actually supposedly slightly cooler. Now, they're cooler for a couple of reasons. One, they hold on to moisture, but our research on heat shows that the majority of the heat comes from the fibers. It's the fibers reflecting. AstroTurf without any infill is much hotter than the infill ones because it's all fiber.
The single pile carpets.
The single pile carpet. So the organic infills have been shown to help, but they're kind of like everything else. So you get 10, 20 degrees out of them, and that's about what you get. But so they're a little cooler, and they will hold a little bit of moisture, but usually they don't wick enough of it to make a difference. It's sort of like once that top 1/8 of an inch of infill cools. But they don't offer a lot of cushioning, so you need a pad. So does compaction matter? Because we're really relying on the pad at this point, right? And less so among the organic infill. But again, my experience and research on organic infill is minimal compared to crumb rubber. I hope that answered the question.
That's exactly right, Carl. We're right at the 30-minute hour, the fastest 30 minutes. I think we might be done with Dr. McNitt.
Maybe one more quick one. I know Ben is asking about, he wants to know carrier volume of water when you're putting out 8 gallons of Tide.
Yes. So, 150 gallons.
Okay.
Per acre?
For the whole field. So that's like 1.5 acres. You don't need a lot of water. I mean, it doesn't have to be a sloppy spray. You can make it a sloppy spray if you want, but it's harder to broom when the surface is wet.
Yeah.
So
and I see that somebody's asking about shoes, and we'd have another 20-minute conversation with Andy if we'd open it up to the shoes. But suffice it to say, Andy's got a 2019 shoe study that he conducted, available at the Sports Surface website that he maintains.
That's true. You can find out at ssrc.psu.edu. And not only do we have our shoes listed, but we have the posters that are hung up in the NFL locker rooms as to which shoes are good, which ones are not. Obviously, they were tested at BioCore, University of Virginia, with much heavier players. My list tends to be for lighter players. So it's more like high school, elementary school, and they're not always the same. There's a lot of good correlation there, but there are some interesting differences. Look at the website, ssrc.psu.edu.
You're the man, Andy. I always love seeing you. And just one more time, you know, when you started doing synthetic turf 20-something years ago, I think people are like, what the hell is it? And if we're turf grass people, this is what we're all going to be managing these things. So again, big kudos to you for keeping at it and keeping the NFL honest.
We did take a few slings and arrows back then.
That's right.
But I'm a big guy. I can take it.
You can, Grandpa. And if you'd like to hear more about this, we have a podcast that we've done in another venue with Andy talking about this more in depth on Frankly Speaking on TurfNet that will do some shameless promotion. Andy, thanks so much for taking the time. Be safe, brother, out there in Western PA.
Always a pleasure.
This has been a production of Cornell University. On the web at cornell.edu.